Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen. I'm a staff advisor at the UC Davis Health Professions Advising Office. Welcome again to our App Prep program series, where HPA is going through each portion of the application process to better support our applicants for the 2025 to 2026 cycle. We know that we've already had 10 sessions so far together beginning in January, and that's a lot of information to cover. So, to best support everyone, we know that sometimes we forget things or there's a lot going on. So, to better support you all, we've come up with this additional session and do some reminders, a recap of what we've gone through. So, today we do have a fun Kahoot style quiz for us to go through together. I'm going to share my screen. Okie dokie. That should be shared there. Perfect. And we're just going to go ahead and get started today. Alrighty. So the first one, we're just, welcome. We're going to do some myth busting first, and then we'll go over some timeline questions and then how HPA can support you. And that includes all UC Davis students and alumni. No matter when you've graduated, the UC Davis Health Professions Advising Office is here to help you throughout your journey to health professional schools, medical school, dental school, etc. Alrighty, our first question is true or false. Everyone should submit their application on the first day to be considered early. True or false? And that is going to be false. And that is a really big myth that I hear all the time in advising that I have to submit the first day to be considered or like the first week. There's so many applications, I just have to do it. And the reality is, we really do encourage being early, yes, and balancing that with readiness. So we encourage for most programs, that's going to put us in June and early July. It is definitely nice to submit within that first week, but if we can take some extra time, that can be really helpful as ideally, admissions folks are going to be spending most of their time screening with the written application. So we want to make sure those ideas are well developed. Okay, next question. Application verification typically takes 5 to 10 days or 4 to 6 weeks. It is 4 to 6 weeks. This is probably a time frame that you've heard quite often. I will say that that timeline does actually depend on what month we're talking about and what health field or application system are we referring to, because there can be some differences there. So we always recommend, checking in on your timeline with an HPA advisor to make sure we're applying as strategically as possible. True or false? Most health professional schools are on deadline admissions. True or false? This is false. Most health professional schools are on rolling admissions. So, quick recap on the differences between the two. Deadline admissions is probably what you're the most accustomed to, where they're making decisions or reviewing applications after the deadline. However, most health professional schools are on rolling admissions, which means they review them as they receive them. And the reason why that matters is because sometimes I hear applicants ask, well, when is the last possible time I can do something or submit something or send it to a school? And you can still totally ask that question. You will still see deadlines on schools' websites, but something to consider is med schools aren't reviewing them after that deadline. They've been reviewing them since the beginning of the cycle when they receive those applications. So to be as strategic as possible in this process, class, we do encourage being mindful that it's on rolling admissions. So how can we again balance earliness and readiness in the cycle? How can we maximize or increase your chances of success by considering how are med schools and other health professional schools approaching this process? So in general, most medical schools, dental schools, and some other schools are approaching it in this way. There are exceptions. For example, vet school is pretty much deadline admissions with a little bit of exception or wiggle room. Um, and some professions are a mix of kind of both. For example, pharmacy school has some rolling deadlines. Sometimes optometry schools have that too. Nursing and PA schools could be a mix where some of your schools on your list might be deadline, some of them might be rolling. So we do want to double check based on what health profession you're pursuing, and again, chatting with an HPA advisor of what timeline makes sense based on your own situation, in order to be successful as possible. Okie dokie. What is the safe GPA overall and science to apply to health professional schools? 3.0 plus, 3.2 plus, 3.5 plus, or 3.7 plus. We are going to say it's going to be a 3.0 and above. And for some folks, that might feel really good, so that's always really happy news to share. Taking a step back, what does this mean? So we want your GPA to go as high as it can go. For most fields, that'll put you at about a 3.5 plus as a competitive GPA. And for most fields and most schools, a 3.0 and above is usually the minimum to apply with. And again, we do encourage having your GPA go as high as it can go to increase your competitiveness or increase your chances of success. But in general, that is the minimum that we would need to move forward in this process. It's really common for health professional schools to use computer screens in this process, meaning that if an applicant doesn't meet a certain threshold, then their application can get automatically screened out by the computer. And that means a real person isn't getting your application. And I don't know about you, but this process does take a lot of time, energy, and money, and I want a real person to see everybody's application. So definitely encourage just being mindful of, do you meet these eligibility requirements first? And I will note that there's nothing in the primary or secondary application systems that prevents an applicant from moving forward if they don't meet it. So that is a check for eligibility requirements that you have to do yourself. The application systems, unfortunately won't do that for you. And again, I'm totally in the business of saving time and money. And so just asking yourself, do you meet these requirements? Do you feel ready for this cycle? I do encourage that GPA tends to be a really big question and concern for a lot of applicants. And I get it. Science classes are hard, Davis is hard, and I want you to succeed. And I want to help you find solutions to get to medical, dental, etc., health professional school of your choice. So how can we work together to find those solutions or next steps for you? So if you do have any questions or concerns about your GPA, or are you meeting those requirements, I would definitely recommend let's have a conversation about it as soon as we can. That might be a 30-minute appointment, or it might be at our 15-minute drop-in sessions. Those are scheduled the day of, so a little bit in advance. And that tends to be a much faster and easier way for us to connect and figure out what's going on. And maybe we do need a deeper conversation and we'll want to schedule a 30-minute session together. But, it's going to take that first step of going to a session first, going to an appointment, and having us work together moving forward. From here, sometimes folks wonder, well, what's included in that science GPA, or how is the overall GPA calculated? And I will say that is health profession specific, and sometimes it's even school specific. But in general, most health fields would agree that an overall GPA is going to include everything that you've done at a higher education level. And then science GPA, that is really dependent by the application system and what counts. You can actually check out most of the time what are in those categories. I do again recommend meeting with an advisor if you do have those questions. These are not the only GPAs that schools will look at. They will have access to your full academic record, and they often do pull additional numbers, like how is your last 40 to 60 units doing? So based off of that, they're looking for an upward trend, right? So they're looking for have you taken some harder classes or done well at the end? So it's very possible to go to health professional school with a lower GPA, but we just like to bring up, are we meeting those requirements? Because is this going to be the cycle for you? And again, we do want you to succeed and we want to work with you in succeeding. Okay, true or false? If I repeat a class, the original grade is not included in my application/GPA. True or false? So that is going to be false. And so the positive version of that sentence is repeated grades, 9 times out of 10, they're usually included in your application. And that can be really confusing for applicants because in our grading system, Oasis, it looks like grades are replaced. However, when you apply to medical, dental, etc., health professional schools, they will still see the original grade and any repeats after that. So the original grade does get factored in, and mathematically, things are basically getting averaged out in that overall GPA, and if it's a science class within that science GPA. And that can be really tough news to hear when you're not expecting that. And it does suck. But I would encourage that this is the reality for all applicants, right? So it's not just you. I would also encourage that repeating classes actually happens a lot more often than applicants realize, especially in those tougher classes like organic chemistry. And if you have had to repeat a class or two or so, it's still very possible to go to health professional school. If you've had to repeat even multiple classes, again, maybe it's time to chat with someone and take that first step and figure out what's going on. How can we work on things together? I would also note, again, it's not fun to be the messenger for some harder news, but I would really encourage that by knowing this information today, you have the power to decide versus, maybe you did apply and you get your verified GPA and you realize this is not the GPA that I thought that I had. That's much harder to grapple with, much harder to change things at that point, right? Versus today, you have the time and the power to figure out what do you want to do with your next steps, or again, talk with someone that you trust to figure out some options for you. Okay, true or false? Applicants are encouraged to use their official transcripts from all institutions attended for the transcript entry portion. True or false? This is true. I'm gonna wait until I think it's the next question before I dive any deeper. True or false, if I attended community college or another college that shows up on my Davis transcript, I can just use my UC Davis transcript when filling out the transcript entry portion. True or false? So that is false. Um, And the reason why is because we're going to need official transcripts again from every higher education institution that you've attended. So if you've attended community college, another four-year institution, Davis, if you attended a college after you graduated, Davis, all of these institutions we want to get official transcripts for and send it to AMCAS, ACOMAS, or the centralized application system that you're applying for, as well as sending it to yourself. You can make sure that you're filling out that portion correctly. And even if you see those, that information popping up on your Oasis, that might look very different than your official transcript at Davis. So again, all transcripts is the general rule of thumb there. We do have a YouTube video on how to get your transcripts from Davis, super quick and easy. We also have a YouTube video diving into, well, how do we fill out that transcript entry portion. It is recommended to copy and paste my resume into the experiences section. True or false? Yep, in general, that is a false. We would really recommend let's spend some time revising with an HPA staff on that 600 or 700 characters that you get. It doesn't feel like a lot, but I promise that we can really maximize that space, not only within that single experience, but across your experiences section in order to provide more depth and insight into you as an applicant. And oftentimes it looks very different than how it looks in your resume. So we do encourage being able to spend that time, which as we can already tell, we're getting a hint of, how long this process can take with the written application revisions. And so again, that's why we encourage within 4 to 6 weeks of the application opening is typically considered early. So kind of a sneak peek into the reasons why folks are submitting it in June or early July in order to give a little bit more balance to the readiness portion. Okie dokie, next question. If I have only volunteered for an experience for 1 day, applicants should include this in their application. True or false? That is true. Sometimes applicants get worried that, oh, it was only for 8 hours or however many hours it was. It's not significant enough to put in the application. Um, But I've actually met plenty of applicants where they were volunteering at an event and it was a life-changing experience for them or it gave a lot of insight into their goals. So I would encourage it, the experiences section can be a place to include it. And if you have questions about whether something should or shouldn't be included or how like maybe you've had multiple roles within an experience and how to showcase that in the experiences section, definitely all super great questions we can review when we're looking at things one-on-one during drop-ins or 30-minute appointments. Okie dokie. So we've covered some pretty big myths there. We are still going to tackle them, but a little bit more of an emphasis on the application and the timeline to apply. The average number of revisions of their personal statement working with HPA. So this is the average number for applicants to have, 1 to 2, 5 to 7, or 7 to 11 plus. It is 7 to 11 plus. That number can feel a little shocking to folks, especially if they've already been doing a lot of revising themselves. But this is where I like to give that kind, gentle reminder to applicants that writing can be really hard and talking about yourself can be even harder. And oftentimes applicants are still learning how to approach this new genre of writing or to figure out how to portray themselves on paper to admissions or even figure out what they want in the personal statement. And HPA is here to support and guide you throughout that process. And that usually does stem from why we need those 7 to 11 drafts. So we do want to spend and give yourself enough time so that you can have the revisions that you need. So that way it is the best crafted personal statement it could be by the time you submit. True or false? I need my preview or Casper score to submit my primary application and be verified. True or false? That is false. You don't actually need your preview score or Casper in order to submit. And the reason why I bring this up is because there's a lot going on in the application process, right? You got to write your personal statement, get letters of rec, and if you're figuring out graduation right now or finals or just fill in the blank, I'm sure life is very busy right now, and there's a lot going on for the application process. And I encourage, how can we, sometimes take a step back and think about big picture items and knowing what is or isn't needed in order to submit your application, and how can we maybe prioritize your time for those things. And again, everyone's timeline can look a little different. So maybe you do need to take it earlier than your friend because you know that you have a family commitment coming up or things of that nature. That's always something we're happy to talk about with applicants to maximize your time as we prepare for the cycle. Most schools require secondaries slash supplemental essays, which will take additional time and another fee. True or false? This is true. So we do want to, again, take that step back. This is a marathon, not a race. How can we take some time to learn more about how the admissions process works? Think about a timeline that makes sense for you. Also, give yourself enough time to rest. Prioritize your physical and mental health, so that way we can continue to do other things for the application. And also, can we budget these things out as well? How many schools do you feel comfortable applying to, knowing that there are going to be additional fees? Um, on the topic of fees, some folks do or will qualify for financial aid. So next question. I don't have to submit all of my schools at once. I can submit more schools during and after verification. True or false? I just realized the financial aid question will be next. It's coming up very soon, I promise. So this is true. This is a strategy that we actually really encourage, particularly for our medical school applicants, based on the average number our applicants typically apply to. We are going to spend a whole session on it next week. It'll be Tuesday, May 27th. So I'm not going to go into it there. So instead, I'm going to go into the next question. Fee assistance programs may have rules on when to submit and to how many schools they require you to submit in your first submission. True or false? This is true. So every fee assistance program across the different health fields, for example, AMCAS, ADSAS for dental, ACOMAS for DO, etc., they all have some different, benefits. So the number of schools that you can receive financial support for, the time frame of when you ask for fee assistance or eligibility, as well as when you're expected to turn in your application once you've been notified you qualify, as well as, again, how many schools they expect you to submit within that first batch. For example, the AAMC, if you qualify for the AMCAS's fee assistance, specifically for allopathic med schools, you can receive up to 20 submissions, and you can still receive all 20 submissions if you hit submit on one school, and we can continue to add more schools over time. However, that is a very different rule than other application systems. So we definitely want to know the terms and conditions of that well in advance, because it's always a hard conversation when applicants don't realize when they're supposed to submit or how many schools they get, and it's a much harder conversation of, well, where do we go from here? So we definitely want to double check that. If you're not sure, HPA is definitely happy to help walk you through those things too. Next question. For competitive fields, HPA encourages all applicants to apply to all of the California programs slash schools. True or false? That is false. And it can feel really scary, right? Especially applying to programs like PA school or medicine, etc. And we just want to stay in California, or, if you feel that way, that's pretty common. And it can feel like, oh, I just have to add all of them no matter what. We do encourage taking a step back and, thinking really hard about what past personal and professional experiences have you had, and does that align with the schools that you're applying to, whether they're in California or they're out of state? Because sometimes schools do have additional considerations. Um, for example, some schools really have a regional preference, and have you worked with their specific communities before? Or some schools might have a requirement to, you know, have a letter of rec from a religious figure or a leader. So again, we do still want to double check schools and make sure that we're going to be a good match or a good fit for them. Okay. True or false? The standardized score, MCAT, DAT, etc., is typically required to have your application reviewed, or sometimes screened, or have a complete application. That is going to be true. So we do want to be mindful of, like, when are you hitting submit, and then when our school is going to get your application, and when are you going to have that official score ready. And again, that does just kind of go back to, let's have a timeline that makes sense for you. Alrighty, well, we've talked about a lot of the different areas of the application, or, kind of briefly did a recap of those things. As you can tell, it's a lot of information. You're more than welcome to go back and watch or re-watch our recordings as part of our app prep program series. From here, we are going to chat about how can the UC Davis Health Professions Advising help you as a UC Davis student or alumni. That friendly reminder, we can only serve UC Davis students and alumni. If you're not in that boat, there are some free resources. I do like to shout out NAAH, NAAHP, as well as looking back to your own institution that you've attended as well. Alrighty, true or false, going to our annual pre-health conference and having a positive interaction can lead to interviews. True or false? This is absolutely true. I'm very happy to say, um, this can be a really great opportunity because during the first half of the day, we have our exhibitors fair, where we have over 200 exhibitors from across the health professional fields, including medicine, with admissions representatives. And these are the folks that are going to have the power to decide, are we going to push your application through? Are we going to invite you for interview? And this can be a really great opportunity to put a name to, or put a face to your name in your application. Um, every cycle, I feel very fortunate to say that I have applicants who are able to make a positive impression, and they do get interviews. Or at least we could say, they went to conference, they felt like they had a good conversation, and then Monday they're getting invited for interviews at those same schools. So definitely at least a lot of correlation there. We do have registration open already. This is an event open to all UC Davis students, alumni, and even non-UC Davis students as well. UC Davis students / alumni do get a bit of a discount as well. So just to let you know, registration already open for 2025. Alrighty, true or false? HPA's App Prep program has recordings from the winter and spring quarter sessions. This is true. I gave away the answer already a couple of times today, but definitely encourage rewatching them as needed. And we know it's a lot of content, so sometimes we do go through things quickly. Doesn't matter if you keep rewatching them, or if you even have follow-up questions, you're always welcome to ask. Alrighty, HPA's email newsletter is sent every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. This is a multi-select. We do typically send it every Monday and Thursday, where you can hear about not only HPA's events, but also on and off campus opportunities. And I do encourage, even for those in the application cycle, to definitely still stay on this email newsletter because we're going to continue to do events that I think can be really helpful. For example, we host our annual interview week, typically in August, where we go through the different styles of interviewing, how to prepare, and it all culminates to Friday afternoon where we do a virtual mock interview, MMI style. So we typically have quite a number of attendees and they're cycling through and meeting different interviewers and getting live practice. We'll also host some other mock interview days. We also have our summer pre-med boot camp sessions or other boot camps. Well, I don't think you would need to go to like Med School 101 or Vet School 101 session. You're very well acquainted with the application process at this point, but there still could be some good sessions for you to go to, like the info sessions that we do, or the health professional panels, or current student panels to get more insights into their journeys. And also, when med schools or health professional schools are there, can they give some insights into their timeline for interviewing or how their interview goes? So I definitely think there's still plenty of things for you to do with HPA during your application cycle. I think one of the saddest or worst things an applicant can do after submitting their primary is going away. We want to continue to support you throughout this time, and the more that we're in contact, the more we can figure things out or find solutions. Next question. Alumni have access to HPA services and advising only up to 1 year, only up to 5 years. Yes, all alumni, no matter when you've graduated. And this is very true. We're very fortunate that we're able to provide the support for all alumni, that we do not have an expiration on our services. And I do just like to shout out that this is not the case for all institutions. And so UC Davis is investing in you and your future as a health professional. And so how do we make the most out of our resources? We definitely encourage, again, you're still welcome and invited to events like this, in person or virtual, as well as, again, our advising services. Alrighty, I think this is our last question. True or false? You can meet with HPA to discuss your personal statement or other written application components during a 15-minute scheduled drop-in appointment. This is true. And sometimes I hear thoughts like, well, how could we possibly go through the whole thing in 15 minutes? It's a lot of writing. And you're right, it totally is. Um, However, I would encourage, that's actually how we spend a lot of our drop-ins, is reviewing personal statements and written application components. I would also encourage, if you are able to come to drop-ins regularly, so maybe that is twice a week, that's already 30 minutes together, which is the same amount of time that we'd be spending in a 30-minute session. So how it works is folks are able to have up to one 30-minute session and up to one 15-minute session, both at the same time in our appointment system. So I say double dip. Let's try and get as much contact as possible so that way we can continue to make more progress. But we're more than happy to look at all application components, and all questions are always welcome at drop-ins and 30-minute appointments. It doesn't matter. The only real difference is the time frame of when you can schedule them, and the literal 15 versus 30 minutes. But I promise we can get a lot accomplished in drop-ins, otherwise we wouldn't be doing them. But this is just a really great way for us to connect with folks a little easier, a little faster. Alrighty, this does conclude our Kahoot, so I hope you were able to get a nice refresher as well as maybe even learn something new today. We do look forward to seeing you again next week at our app prep session. It is technically the last workshop in our app prep series, but again, HPA will continue to do application and applicant support afterwards. So we're not going away. We know that we still have a lot of work to do. Next week is going to be on submission strategies and next steps for after you submit. So I look forward to seeing you all again next week. I hope you have a great rest of your day.